and welcome to This Week in Travel. I'm your host Michelle Robson and editor of Turning Left for Less. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see in the background I'm sitting in the wonderful Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Edinburgh. In front of me I've got a great view of the Edinburgh Castle and I've got a lovely suite named after Alexander Graham Bell. So if you're looking to stay somewhere in Edinburgh, this is my second visit to the Waldorf. It's a great place to use your Hilton points because it's normally quite pricey. And they have a really nice spa downstairs. I had a beautiful foot and leg relaxing massage last night when I got back, great after doing some walking around looking at the sights. And they also have a couple of different restaurants here if you've had a long day and you don't fancy venturing out. So I had dinner in the Grazing restaurant, which is the more casual, but actually they had some fantastic cocktails, so I'd recommend trying some of those, and a really interesting 100-mile menu, which is basically all ingredients that are within 100 miles of the front door of the restaurant. So great if you're into locally sourced food. So the first bit of news this week is about Las Vegas. So if you're heading there and you have World of Hyatt status, or perhaps you have MGM status, then you probably need to hear the news. I'm hoping you're listening to this on the 14th of July, which is Friday, because that's when one of the parts of the offer changes. So at the moment you've been able to match your Hyatt and MGM status, to status match them, and you've been able to actually keep matching them backwards and forwards, which is probably why they're stopping it, I'm guessing. But this stops on the 14th of July. So if you haven't, and you have got either MGM status, which is the group of hotels and casinos in Vegas, or you've got World of Hyatt status and you're planning to head to Las Vegas, it's worth quickly doing a match, and I will pop the link in below. Now, if you aren't sure whether you need it or not, it's worth having MGM status if you're planning to go to Vegas, because you get things like skip the line for buffets and for check-in if you're staying in an MGM hotel. And also it's always worth earning the points if you plan to go back again, or even if you're going to spend quite a lot whilst you're there and you're there for a few days, because you can spend them straight away. And if you're using the MGM status to add to your room, so you're getting all your room spend on it and perhaps some gambling and some restaurants, then it soon adds up and you can soon get some rewards you can spend instantly. So definitely worth doing. The rest of the changes happen after the 30th of September, or rather say on the 30th of September. So up until that point, you can still get your higher status nights and your points from staying at any MGM hotel. But if you check out after the 30th of September, then you will no longer get any of those points or status nights. So definitely worth thinking about, do you want to still stay in the MGM hotel? Is there somewhere else you'd rather stay? And I think it's really interesting that they're ending the partnership. Now, they were due to convert the old Rio Hotel into a Hyatt hotel, but it's gone very quiet. It was announced, I think, 2021, but nothing's really happened since then. So it'd be interesting if that goes ahead. Also worth noting is MGM recently took over the Cosmopolitan. Now that's part of Marriott, which is a much bigger group, and they also are less guarded about giving status. World of Hyatt generally don't give status with credit cards or anything like that, which is why they tend to be one of the best status programs. So it could be perhaps that MGM plan to match with somebody else. I'm hoping it's Marriott, because if they do, that would be great, because I visit Vegas a lot and I am a Marriott collector. So we'll wait and see what happens. As yet, they haven't really said what's going to happen with the Cosmopolitan, other than at the moment there's no change from it being part of Bonvoy, but we'll wait and see what happens. So I just thought that was worth highlighting for anyone that is heading to Vegas soon and normally takes part in one of those matches. So the other bit of news that I have is that we will be taking a break on This Week in Travel for the summer. So there will be no episodes after this one until early September. When we come back, we're going to have a slightly different format. So if you have some thoughts on what you would like to see in the future, so if there's certain topics you'd like us to cover, if you'd rather have it less frequency but longer, or perhaps you'd rather have it every week but shorter, then do let us know your thoughts in the comments. Now, if you're listening on a podcast, you probably can't do that, but you can go to turningleftforless.com and you'll find there's an article related to this particular episode. Pop your comment in there, or you can also go to our Facebook page where you can do the same, or you can go to YouTube where this episode is also available on our Turning Left for Less channel under This Week in Travel. So do let us know what you think, because we're looking at just tweaking the format. Some people seem to prefer it shorter, some want it longer, so we're just going to look at whether we make make it more consistent, and whether we carry on doing it every week. Sometimes it's quite hard because I'm traveling on trips with airlines or hotels where you literally get no time to do anything yourself generally, and it's quite hard to get it done every week and keep the quality consistent. So I'll be having a think about it over the summer, but I'd love to hear what you think. This week, I'm going to be concentrating on Hilton versus Marriott. Now, these are two programs that I have status in. I have almost top tier in Marriott, so I have the platinum status. There is also ambassador above that and titanium, but I think platinum is a happy medium that's reasonably easy to obtain if you're a frequent traveler. And also I have the Hilton diamond status. So I thought it's worth, since these are probably the two biggest chains and the ones that people generally gravitate towards, I thought it was worth looking at which do I think is best, because I stay in both chains. I was Hilton Diamond for a long time, where I kind of put all my stays their way. Now I tend to put more towards Marriott, because I actually get my Hilton Diamond through Gold Guest List with British Airways. It's one of the perks. So I tend to put more towards Marriott because I like to try and keep that status as well. But both actually have pros and cons. And I always say, whenever you're deciding what you want to do travel-wise, you think what suits you, not what some blogger like me says is the best thing to do, but what suits your style of travel. Are you a business traveller? Do you generally want a mid-range sort of Hilton or standard Marriott? Are you looking more for luxury properties? Do you want to get points to redeem? Are you more interested in the perks, like your upgrades? So what actually suits you? And I'll try and cover most of those things as we go along. So I thought we'd start with Hilton, because I'd say out of all the frequent travellers I know, that's probably the one most people have. And the reason for this is it is reasonably easy to get in terms of status. I think compared with Marriott is easier. So for a start, if you have the American Express Platinum card, you get gold membership with that straight away of Hilton. So it's worth getting the Platinum card if you're thinking of perhaps getting some status, but you're struggling to get some. Obviously it's quite expensive. I pay around £50 a month for it, but it does come with lots of perks, and I will pop in below my episode where I talk about all the travel perks that it comes with. And I'll just hasten to say I'm not a financial advisor, I'm just talking purely about the perks that you can get for it, not about whether it's best for you financially or not. So the other way to easily get Hilton status is they constantly do a status match, where they will match your status with a different program, and then you can easily complete a reduced set of nights. I'll pop in a link below that explains it. You can either do gold or platinum. You get the status instantly to start off with, and then with a set period of time you have to do so many nights, and then you get it as the full status. So it's much easier than trying to do it over a whole year, providing you time it right. I've done some of these status challenges before, and my advice is wait until you know you're going to be able to do the stays. Don't just think, oh, that's a good idea, I'll sign up now, and then find that the clock started ticking and actually you've got a holiday booked where you've already got accommodation booked or something like that. So definitely time it well is my advice. So this is part of the problem I think with Hilton, is it's too easy to get. Particularly in the US, there's actually a lot of credit cards that come with Hilton status, and one even comes with Diamond now, I believe. So you will find when you get to the US that you actually are competing with literally thousands of other high status people. So you generally won't really get very good perks there. You tend not to get upgrades in busy hotels, and you're nothing special, not that you are anyway. We're not that entitled just because we've got a shiny diamond membership. But yeah, you tend to not really get much out of them because there's just so many other people. It has kind of lost its value, I think. And personally, I'm totally against a lot of these ones where it gives top status. I think the mid-range is fine, but when it comes to the top status, I think it's just getting to the point where it's meaningless with a lot of these cards. But worth bearing in mind, if you travel a lot in the US, I would say neither one is particularly good, because both of them have been devalued by status just being given away. The other thing about Hilton, which is also I think worse than it is for Marriott, and a particular US problem, is the breakfast credit. So with Hilton, you're normally entitled to breakfast both at gold level and platinum, which is why I think if you're someone that generally eats breakfast, is on holiday and travels with your partner or friend, it can definitely add a lot of value, because it's a lot more complicated with Marriott in terms of breakfast, but I'll come on to that. So Hilton Gold and Diamond, you get your breakfast free, and this can be worth quite a lot of money in the higher end hotels, so definitely worth considering, because it can save you some money. However, in the US, they don't do that. They give you a set amount of credit, which is normally pretty low. And because of all the taxes and tipping, etc. in the US, this very rarely covers your breakfast. It might cover your coffee and your juice and maybe, you know, a bagel or something, but it's generally not going to cover a main item, because a lot of the time it's, you know, somewhere between $10 and $20. It all depends on the type of hotel. But yeah, generally it means that your breakfast won't be covered. So might be worth considering if that's the right scheme for you if you do a lot of US travel and you particularly wanted breakfast. The good news is it's actually a credit for food and beverage, so you don't have to use it for breakfast. So for those that don't actually use the breakfast benefit, it might be an advantage, because you could get, you know, a drink in the bar or by the pool. So it does have some advantages. Now, the other thing I like about Hilton is the fact that I find it relatively easy to earn points. You do need to be on the ball, because a lot of these points come from bonus offers, but they tend to alternate between either 2,000 points per stay or double points. Now, if you're someone who stays in high-end hotels, the double points can really help you rack up the points to redeem and get you some good redemptions in the future. I find Marriott, they do bonuses, but they're a lot more sporadic. You can go months and months without anything, and they tend to be much worse. Whereas I find with Hilton, they do them almost constantly. Normally as one ends, another one starts. So I think it's definitely better if you're looking to redeem your points and you're a less frequent stayer. With Hilton, you get a couple of extra perks in terms of extra points. So if you're gold, you'll get 80% bonus on your points that you earn. And with the diamond, you will also get 100% bonus. The other thing I'll mention about Hilton is they have something called My Way, which is basically a way to choose what you want kind of as a welcome gift at a hotel, and that only applies to gold and diamond. I find this a bit complicated. I don't really want to have to think about what I'm selecting. I'd rather you just get it, or they ask you at the hotel, because you're meant to select it before you arrive. So you can select it in your profile to either have points or have whatever the amenity is. But yeah, if you get it wrong, then it's a bit annoying. Most hotels will change it, but you are meant to do it before you arrive. So just worth bearing in mind, it does make it a bit more complicated. In terms of upgrades, I find Hilton are generally pretty good when you get to diamond level outside the US. It's not like Marriott, where generally you will get a suite night award, which I'll come into in a minute. But I do find that I do get suites now and again on Hilton. I'd say I probably get them more on Marriott, even though I've got equivalent membership. But yeah, you are entitled to upgrades at the higher end. And I do find that in Europe, they're generally pretty good. You at least get one upgrade category. I find some of the Conrads worse for this. I find the lower end hotels, like the standard Hiltons, better for that. And it's always worth asking. If it's a special occasion, I would normally contact the hotel in advance and say, can you, help me out here, special occasion, any chance of an upgrade. The other thing I like about the Hilton is the lounge access. So if you're diamond, you get access to the lounge. Again, in the US, this isn't really worth as much, because a lot of the lounges haven't reopened since COVID, and also you don't get free drinks, you only get free soft drinks in the vast majority of them. So it's definitely worth considering that. If you wanted lounge access, it's not necessarily worth what it used to be in the US. At the gold level, you get lounge access only if you're upgraded to an executive level. However, you are entitled to get an upgrade to an executive level if it's available, but it's up to the hotel. They don't have to, but your entitlement is for an upgrade up to executive level. So that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, diamond, you get access to the lounge, and there are some very nice ones at the higher end hotels. Talking of higher end hotels, I find with Hilton there's less choice normally if I wanted luxury hotels, whereas I find with Marriott there's a much wider range. So with Hilton you've got Waldorf, like the one I'm staying in today, Conrad, which I find quite variable now. They used to be very consistent and very luxurious. Now you've got ones like the one in Vegas that really is more like a bog standard Hilton. So I think that they're not as good as they used to be. And then you've also got the LXR brand, which is the more independent hotels. And then I think also Curio, although they tend to be more 4-star, they're normally very nice boutique properties. So you've got a reasonable spread there, and then obviously the lower end of the standard Hiltons and down to Hamptons, etc. So yeah, for the higher end, I think Marriott personally is better in terms of choice. So for Marriott, as I've just been talking about, the luxury side of it I think is better because you've got St Regis, you've got Ritz-Carlton, you've got the luxury collection, and you've got the JW Marriott, you've got W, which maybe are getting a bit more down on the luxury scale, Westin, that I think are a bit better than a standard Hilton. So there's more of a wide range, I think, when you're looking for luxury properties. The other thing I would say about Marriott, which is I think a negative, as I mentioned before, is the whole breakfast scenario. Now, I'm not going to go into the rules of this because there are whole articles online covering it because it's so complicated. In some properties you get breakfast, so a standard Marriott you will get breakfast in the lounge if the lounge is open. If not, normally they will give you breakfast in the restaurant. But as of that, it just varies wildly. Some of the lower end, weirdly, you get breakfast included, but the higher end you don't. So you have to study it every single time because I can't remember. They've got so many different brands. I have to look at it every time to remind myself what isn't included. So I find that probably the most annoying thing about Marriott, because I tend to, when I'm away, I tend to eat breakfast but not lunch most of the time. So yeah, it's pretty annoying having to look it up every time. As I've mentioned before, I don't think Marriott have such good perks in terms of bonuses. They do have them every now and again, but they tend to not be very generous, so I find it a lot harder to earn points on a Marriott. The plus side though is I find it easier to redeem on Marriott compared with Hilton, particularly in terms of the number of points. I find Hilton only have a very small number at the standard rate, and then it will, it will go from like 95,000 to 300,000 just for a standard room, because they have these sort of premium things when they've sold out of the basic ones. And some destinations that are really popular, they literally sell out of the normal standard redemption within 24 hours, whereas I find that virtually never happens on Marriott. So you can nearly always, close to the time, get a decent hotel that's not an outrageous amount of points. So in terms of redemptions, I think Marriott are better, but the converse side is that obviously you have to have enough points to get them, and it's a bit hard to get the points. It's also slightly harder to get Marriott. However, there is a credit card that I like, which is the Marriott Bond by American Express card. Now, this only gives you the equivalent of 15 nights status, but it takes you a lot closer to getting status with Marriott. So that's quite useful. And also you get bonus points on every transaction. So that helps you rack up the points more quickly. And I have that card. So that to me kind of tips the balance versus Hilton. And it's a reasonably cheap card as well. Again, I'll put the link below as to all the details for that, which I discussed in a previous episode. So in terms of points, I've been saying about how Marriott is harder to get points or earn points, not just because of the bonus promotions. So the other problem that you have is that with gold, for example, you get a 25% bonus versus 80% with Hilton, and with the platinum status, you get a 50% bonus versus 100% with Hilton. So you can see how there is a difference in the terms of earning points. It is much harder with Marriott, I think. But it swings and roundabouts. As I said earlier in the programme, it all depends on what's most important to you. If you're not so bothered about redemptions, but you're all about the perks, then actually Marriott might suit you better. As I've said, the breakfast varies wildly. One thing that I do find very consistent is the 4 p.m. checkout for the Marriott Platinum status. Now, it's 4 p.m. everywhere apart from in resorts, but I've even had some success with resorts. And it's pretty much guaranteed. I've never had a no yet. So 4 p.m. for me is a fantastic perk if you're flying back from somewhere like Asia or the Middle East, where the flight can be really late at night. It's great to have that late checkout. So for me, that's a big perk, because with Hilton, it's only 2 p.m. For the Diamond. And I also find it much more likely that you'll get refused. I mean, obviously with Marriott, they still could refuse you, even though they're not meant to, because they could be fully booked. But generally, I've not had a problem with that. Whereas Hilton, I found it very hit and miss. I'd say 50-50 that I get the late checkout. And I should just point out with the Marriott Gold that it's 2 p.m. And again, that's generally pretty good. So if we just talk about upgrades now with Marriott. Now the difference here at the higher levels is with Marriott Platinum, you are actually entitled to a suite. They say select suites, whatever that means. Whereas with Hilton, you're not actually entitled to a suite. Again, as I said earlier, it's still up to the hotel. They don't have to give you a suite, but if they want to, that's included as part of your perks. And I have found actually that I've had some really great upgrades. One of the ones I will name is the Sheraton Park Lane. Now for me, this doesn't have the facilities that some hotels have in London. It doesn't have a spa or swimming pool or anything like that. But they treat their status members really well. Both times I've stayed there, I've got a fantastic upgrade to a suite, a really nice, huge suite. So they're a really good one for that. So you do sometimes get suites. And that nicely leads me on to also another perk of the Marriott Platinum is the fact that you get the Suite Night Awards. Now, some people, if they live in the US, will say these are completely useless because they never get them. But so far, the only time I've not had one clear has been in the US. So use them wisely. If it's really important to you, don't try using them in the US because you're competing, as I said earlier, against so many status holders that the chances of getting it are much more unlikely. However, in Europe, I've generally had 100% success rate and had some really great suites. So just to explain how it works, when you re-qualify for your Marriott Platinum status, you will get offered a choice of different awards. I personally think the best one is the Suite Night Awards, but you can also gift silver status to someone else. And there's a few other things like money off a bed from Marriott. But the Suite Night Awards I think are really valuable because although they're not guaranteed, at least you know in advance that you're going to get an upgrade, and then you could perhaps choose to pay for something a bit better if you didn't get it. And you get 5 of these per year, and you have to request them in advance, and they have to tell you by a certain point that whether they've cleared or not. But they are really useful, and what I like is when you can do it all online in the app, and it shows you what the different choices are. Now they're not always suites. Sometimes it could be, for example, a refurbished room, but there's nearly always a choice of 2 or 3 or even more different types of rooms. So it's entirely up to you how many ones you want to select. You know, you might be happy with actually just having a better view and that being more guaranteed than just a random upgrade. But generally I try to only use them for something really good, and I look in advance what the options are. But as I said, that's 5 nights that you get every year where you can get a Suite Night upgrade. Not guaranteed, but at least kind of guaranteed in advance when it's been approved. And if they don't get approved, then it just goes back in the pot and you can use it again. So it's a good perk for me and one that keeps me loyal to Marriott. With Marriott, it's also fairly easy to get status, and again in the US there is a big problem now. Unfortunately, recently Marriott introduced a new credit card in the US that gives the Marriott Platinum status, so that's no longer very special, and you can expect in the US that you're just going to be competing with hundreds of people at the same hotel for getting the upgrades and any of the perks. So in the US it's not particularly useful. So in the UK, there's 2 ways to get status. The first would be with the American Express Platinum card that I mentioned also with the Hilton, and that gives you equivalent status with Marriott, which is Marriott Gold. As I said earlier, it's quite an expensive way to get it, but it is an option if you want to get the Platinum card anyway. And as I've already mentioned, there's also the separate Marriott Bonvoy American Express card. So I guess the $1 million question is, which do I actually think is best? Personally, I prefer the Marriott one simply because of the 4 p.m. checkout and the fact that it's more guaranteed. And I also like the fact that there's a bigger range of brands. It's very rare that I can't find something at the mid to high end somewhere that I'm going. The only place I find it difficult is Scandinavia. There's very few there. But other than that, generally, I think they've got a good spread across different countries. Hilton are fine if you're happier with the mid to lower end. Then I think you'll find hotels pretty much everywhere. When it comes to the higher end, there are a lot more few and far between, so definitely worth bearing in mind. If I wanted to just earn as many points as possible, I would probably go back to Hilton. I managed to rack up a huge amount of points when I was staying with Hiltons that I'm saving for something special. But for me, day to day, the Marriott works better with having the late checkout, the Suite Night Awards, and breakfast in most places, and the club access. And I think with the Gold, it's still a good option with either Hilton or Marriott. It just depends which points are more important to you, whether it's down to wanting those points to get future stays or wanting the perks with Marriott. As I said, I find Marriott probably slightly better for upgrades overall, but between the two, I'd say they're fairly equal. It just depends on what suits you personally, and that's what you need to work out. Both equally easy to get if you get the Platinum card, and if you've got the Platinum card, you don't really need to worry about maintaining status. But if you're looking to get a higher status, then personally I would go for the Marriott one. But that's my opinion. Obviously, I've given you some information. I'll put some more links below, and I'll leave you to make your own mind up. If you've got any comments about if you disagree with what I've said, if you think you've got a preference, feel free to pop them in the comments below. Well, that's it for a few weeks now. I'll see you back after the summer in early September. Until then, have a great summer and happy travels.